Imagine a quiet American town, lost in the woods and rivers. Nothing happens here, until one day something happens that changes everything forever. Two boys. A river. One is drowning. The other is pushing. And a man. A black mechanic who everyone used to ignore. But that day, he became a hero. And then a target. This is not just a story about salvation. This is a story about how the truth is like a river. You can hide it, but it will always break to the surface. What you are about to hear will shock, move, and leave you wondering, what would you do if you were in his place? Elijah Carter wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. At 52 years old, he had spent most of his life trying to avoid it. The quiet life suited him just fine, working at East Hollow Auto, fixing busted transmissions, tuning up old Buicks and Chevys, nodding politely to customers who either ignored him or gave him that tight-lipped smile. You know the one. The one that said, "You're all right for one of them." East Hollow, Virginia, was a town caught between the past and the future. The brick buildings downtown still had that 1940s charm, but the undercurrent of the place ran deeper. Elijah knew the rules: keep your head down, work hard, don't give people a reason to talk. It wasn't fear, it was experience. Even when things weren't said aloud, they were known. But the river? The river didn't care. Black Otter Creek had been his sanctuary since he was a boy. His father brought him there the first time when Elijah was just 8. Back then, the man had told him, "The river don't see your skin, son. It just sees your patience." That always stuck with him. So when the late August heat pressed down like a wet towel on his shoulders, Elijah loaded up his battered blue Ford with his fishing pole, a cooler of sweet tea, and an old folding chair that squeaked when he sat in it. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he made his way down to the bank. It was his spot, hidden under a drooping willow, far enough from the bend where the local teens liked to jump into the water. He didn't mind them. Let the kids be kids, he thought. Life was hard enough without someone telling you to stop laughing. He cast his line with ease, his mind drifting into the calm rhythm that only the river could offer. The sun dipped lower, burning orange through the trees. Then he heard it, shouting. Not the playful kind. The panicked kind. Elijah squinted toward the bend. Two boys, one tall and skinny, the other smaller, struggling. At first he thought it was just roughhousing, but then he saw the smaller boy go under. The tall boy wasn't trying to help. His hands were on the kid's shoulders, pushing him down. Elijah dropped his rod. He didn't think. He moved. He ran down the muddy bank, boots splashing through the reeds. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the evening air. "Stop that!" The tall boy looked up, startled, and in that moment of hesitation, Elijah threw off his boots and jumped into the creek. The water was colder than he expected. It shocked the breath out of him, but he powered through, kicking and pulling toward the two boys. The smaller one was now barely visible, just a hand breaking the surface. Elijah reached him first. He wrapped one strong arm around the kid's chest and kicked back hard, pulling them both toward the shallows. The tall boy had already scrambled to the bank and disappeared into the trees. He dragged the kid onto the grass. The boy coughed, then heaved, then gasped like it was the first breath he'd ever taken. Elijah dropped to his knees, exhausted. "Hey," Elijah said gently. "You all right, son?" The boy nodded, still choking on water and fear. He was white, maybe 13. Freckles. Pale blue eyes. Elijah looked around. No one else. Just him and the boy and the river that didn't care. He called 911. He waited. He told the paramedics what happened. He told the sheriff too. And then he went home. He thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. By the next morning, the town of East Hollow was buzzing. Elijah had just sat down on his front porch with a cup of black coffee when his phone rang. It was rare for anyone to call him, especially at 6:47 a.m. The name on the screen surprised him even more: Sheriff Dave Holbrook. "Elijah," the sheriff said. Thought I'd give you a heads up. That kid you pulled out the water? His name's Jeremy Marsh. His parents are, well, let's just say they've got connections. And a lot of opinions. Elijah grunted. That's supposed to mean something to me? Means the news is spreading. Fast. TV crews are already on their way from Richmond. I didn't tell them, but someone did. They're calling it a miraculous rescue. You might want to brace yourself. Elijah sighed and looked out across his yard. His house wasn't much, just a modest wooden frame with peeling white paint and a screen door that slammed too hard, but it was his. He didn't like being the center of attention. And he sure didn't want his name being paraded around the evening news. By midday, 2 different news vans were parked just outside the gas station down the road. The local paper had already run the story online. Local man saves teen from drowning at Black Otter Creek. But it wasn't just that headline, it was the comments that followed. Some praised him. Called him a hero. Said it was proof that kindness still existed in the world. Others? Not so much. I know Elijah. He's a good mechanic. But let's not act like this is some civil rights movie. Kid was probably just roughhousing. Always someone trying to make it racial. Don't forget who his daddy was. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Elijah closed his laptop. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Standing on the porch was a woman in her early 40s, blonde hair, sharp eyes, and a camera crew behind her. Elijah Carter? She asked, offering a bright, practiced smile. I'm Marie Whitlock with Channel 7 News. Do you have a minute? He hesitated. He didn't want to talk to reporters. But something in her tone, something told him this story wasn't going away anytime soon. He stepped outside, arms folded. I just want to say, she continued, your actions yesterday, selfless, brave. People need stories like this. I didn't do it for a story, Elijah said simply. Of course, she nodded. But the town's talking. People want to hear from the man who risked his life to save a stranger. He stared at her for a long second. You want to know the real story? Yes. I saw a kid drowning. I jumped in. Pulled him out. That's it. That's all. Marie gave a nervous chuckle. But some people are saying this incident reflects deeper issues in the town, race, bias, inequality. That your actions crossed a barrier. Elijah's face stayed still, but his voice dropped low. The only barrier I crossed was the one into the water. That line would make the evening news. The next few days were a whirlwind. Interviews. Phone calls. An invitation from the mayor. Elijah wanted none of it. He just wanted to go back to fishing. But Jeremy Marsh's parents wanted to meet him. He agreed. Reluctantly. They met at the town hall. Jeremy sat beside his mother and father, still pale and shaken. His dad, a tall man with a perfect suit and a tight jaw, didn't smile. His mom, holding Jeremy's hand, offered Elijah a week. Thank you? Jeremy, however, stood up. Walked over. Looked Elijah in the eye. I thought I was going to die, the boy said. You saved me. Thank you. Elijah nodded and patted his shoulder. You're gonna be all right, son. It could have ended there. Should have. But when Jeremy turned back to his parents, his father asked, and the other boy, do they know who he was? Jeremy hesitated. The silence in the room was heavy. No, sir, Jeremy said finally. I didn't know him. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. Elijah's eyes narrowed, just a little. Back at the creek a few days later, Elijah tried to fish again. Tried to pretend things were normal. But he couldn't ignore the strange looks at the diner, or the kids whispering as he passed. Something was building. And then, one evening, a folded piece of paper showed up in his mailbox. No return address. He opened it. You should have minded your own business. The handwriting was shaky. Sloppy. But the message was clear. Elijah stared at it for a long time, then folded it up and stuck it in his pocket. He went back inside. Sat down in his chair. turned off the TV, closed his eyes. He knew what he had seen. He knew that Jeremy had recognized the other boy. And he knew that East Hollow wasn't ready for the truth. Not yet. But soon. Very soon. A week passed. Elijah stayed off the news, off social media, off the radar. At least he tried. But stories like his didn't fade away. They grew legs. They twisted. They mutated. Now, some were saying he'd staged the whole thing. Others claimed the boy who had done the drowning was the real victim. That maybe Elijah had misunderstood what he saw. One local blog even hinted that Elijah had a known history of confrontation. That part stung. Because he'd spent his whole life avoiding confrontation. Now they were painting him as the aggressor? He sat one evening at the edge of Black Otter Creek, fishing rod untouched, the line limp in the water. The sun was low, brushing the surface with light. But Elijah's mind was far from peaceful. A voice came from behind. "You're Elijah Carter, right?" He turned slowly. A girl stood there. No more than 15. Auburn hair. Baggy hoodie. Nervous eyes. I was friends with both of them," she said. "Jeremy and the other boy." Elijah said nothing, but his gaze sharpened. He didn't want to hurt Jeremy. It just got out of hand. But now they're acting like it never happened. Elijah didn't speak, so she continued. "His name is Mason Blake. His dad's on the town council. That's why no one's saying anything." Ah. Now the picture was getting clearer. Elijah finally spoke. "Why are you telling me this?" She hesitated. "Because Jeremy's been lying." "And Mason?" "He's laughing about it. Said he scared the truth right out of Jeremy. Said you should have let him drown?" Elijah's jaw tensed. The words didn't surprise him. What surprised him was the growing weight in his chest, something that felt like responsibility. He'd saved Jeremy. But now, someone needed to save the truth. The next morning, Elijah went to Sheriff Holbrook's office. The sheriff, a slow-moving man with a weathered face, rubbed his temples when Elijah came in. "Let me guess," Holbrook said. "You're not letting this go." "Not this time." Elijah told him everything. About the girl. About Mason Blake. About the silence. Holbrook leaned back. "You know how this town works. That's the problem." Holbrook was quiet. "I can bring him in. Talk to him. But unless Jeremy tells the truth, it's a dead end. Then I'll go to Jeremy." The Marsh home was on the nicer side of town. Big lawn, clean siding, red shutters that matched the mailbox. Jeremy opened the door. He looked tired. Older than a boy his age should look. Elijah didn't waste time. "Why are you protecting him?" Jeremy looked away. "He said he'd ruin me." Jeremy whispered. "He said if I told anyone, he'd say I made it all up. That I jumped in the water to fake it. He's already told some kids that. They think I'm a joke now." Elijah placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, you've already been through the worst. But hiding the truth, that don't protect you. It protects him." Jeremy looked up. And for a moment, the fear cracked. There was something stronger behind it. Anger. Resolve. "I'll tell the truth." By that evening, Jeremy had written a signed statement and given it to the sheriff. Mason Blake was brought in for questioning. But that wasn't the end. The story exploded again, this time with a vengeance. Now it wasn't just a rescue. It was about bullying. Corruption. The son of a councilman trying to drown another boy and almost getting away with it. The people of East Hollow weren't ready for this kind of spotlight. Some stood behind Elijah. Others behind Mason. Lines were drawn. And in the middle of it all was a man who never asked to be a hero. That weekend, Elijah's front porch was egged. Someone spray-painted "liar" on his fence. He cleaned it up without a word. Later that night, as he sat on his porch with a cup of tea, a truck slowed down out front. It idled. Then drove away. He didn't flinch. He just sipped his tea and stared out at the dark street. The town was shaking. But the river? The river still didn't care. It flowed, silent and steady, beneath the chaos. And Elijah Carter? He had no intention of backing down. The town council meeting was scheduled for Monday night. Usually, those meetings were sleepy affairs, discussing potholes, garbage routes, budget allocations. But this one? This one had standing room only. Everyone in East Hollow knew why. Mason Blake's father, Councilman William Blake, was there, stern-faced, in his signature navy suit. Elijah sat near the back, arms folded, hat pulled low. He didn't come to speak. He came to listen. Jeremy Marsh and his parents were seated at the front. The boy's statement had ignited a firestorm. Now the town wanted answers. Accountability. When Councilman Blake took the floor, the room tensed. There has been a lot of speculation, he began, voice firm but practiced. About my son. About Mr. Carter. About what really happened at the river. And I want to be absolutely clear, we support due process. But we will not tolerate false accusations that tarnish a young man's future. A murmur ran through the room. Elijah stood. Every head turned. I didn't come here to argue, he said slowly, voice even. I didn't come here to accuse. I came here to remind you of something simple. If a boy had died that day, we wouldn't be asking questions. We'd be burying him. And the one who pushed him under would be free. The silence was electric. Councilman Blake clenched his jaw. You have no proof. I have the boy I pulled from the water, Elijah said. And that's enough for me. That night, Elijah found a rock through his window. It shattered glass and landed in his living room with a thud. On it was a note. Keep talking and you'll end up at the bottom of that river yourself. He reported it to Sheriff Holbrook, who promised to look into it. But Elijah knew that meant nothing. Not in East Hollow. He could feel the town splitting beneath him. Some folks, especially the younger ones, stood behind him. Brought him casseroles, thanked him quietly. Others crossed the street when he walked by. Pretended not to see him at the store. And some got bold. One afternoon, 2 men from the VFW hall cornered him behind the auto shop. You stirring the pot, Carter? Said one, his breath heavy with beer. Elijah didn't move. I saved a boy. That's not stirring. You're making things ugly. The other snapped. People around here don't like ugly. Elijah looked them both in the eyes. Calm. Unmoving. Then maybe they should stop creating it. They didn't touch him. But they wanted to. And Elijah knew, this wasn't just about Mason anymore. This was about a town terrified of looking at itself in the mirror. Meanwhile, Jeremy's life was unraveling. He'd returned to school, only to find whispers and isolation waiting for him. Mason's friends turned the halls into a battlefield. Lockers slammed behind him. Notes were slipped into his books. Snitch. Drown already. Elijah visited him one afternoon after school. The boy was sitting on his porch steps, knees pulled to his chest. They hate me now, Jeremy muttered. They hated you the moment you survived, Elijah replied. Because your survival told the truth. Jeremy looked up, eyes hollow. Was it worth it? Elijah nodded, without hesitation. Always. And that was the moment the boys started to believe it. But East Hollow wasn't done. A rumor began spreading, fast and loud. Someone claimed Elijah had a criminal record. That years ago, he'd assaulted a man during an argument over a car. It wasn't true. But in small towns, the truth doesn't matter as much as who says it first. Marie Whitlock from Channel 7 called him that night. Elijah, I need to ask, were you ever arrested in 1996? No, he said calmly. And if anyone says otherwise, ask them for paperwork. Still, the damage was done. Online comments swarmed. Typical. Had a feeling. Knew he wasn't clean. Elijah didn't respond. He waited. Because the river had taught him something. The current pulls hard right before it shifts. Then, something changed. Jeremy released a video. Just a quiet message, filmed on his phone, posted to social media. I was drowning. I saw Mason's eyes. He wasn't playing. He wanted to hurt me. And Mr. Carter didn't ask who I was or what color my skin was. He just jumped in and saved me. That's a man. That's a hero. And he deserves to be treated like one. The video went viral. Not just in East Hollow, but across the state. Schools started using it in classrooms. Bloggers picked it up. Hashtags flew across Twitter. Suddenly, the story wasn't about the accusation. It was about a boy who told the truth. And the man who saved him. But the tide wasn't done turning. Mason Blake? He was about to make a mistake. A big one. And when he did, the whole town would have to decide what kind of place East Hollow really was. Because the river didn't care. But maybe it was time the people did. 6 months passed. Winter came early in East Hollow. The leaves barely had time to turn gold before frost swept them from the trees. Life slowed. Roads iced. People stayed home. But not Elijah Carter. He kept walking to the creek. Even in the cold. Even when the water crusted over with sheets of ice and his boots crunched with every step. Because some things deserve to be revisited. Not to relive pain, but to remember what was overcome. East Hollow had changed. Not overnight. Not in grand gestures. But in smaller ways, the kind that stick. Sheriff Holbrook retired, replaced by a younger, sharper deputy named Rosa Jennings. First black sheriff in the county's history. Jeremy? He transferred schools. Started therapy. Took up photography. His first photo series, called Surface, was displayed at the County Arts Center. One shot showed a rippling creek at dawn, and in the reflection, the blurry outline of a man with a fishing pole. Everyone knew who it was. They just didn't say it. Elijah never went. But he smiled when he saw the flyer. On the anniversary of the rescue, the mayor invited Elijah to speak at the town center. He said no. But Jeremy asked again. Not for them, the boy said. For me. So Elijah stood in front of a crowd 1 year after he pulled a child from death and pulled a town out of denial. He spoke just 91 words. I didn't jump in that water to be thanked. I jumped because a kid was drowning. That's it. But if that moment reminded anyone in this town what it means to be decent, to choose courage over comfort, then maybe it was more than just a rescue. Maybe it was a mirror. He stepped off the stage to silence. And then? A standing ovation. Even from those who once turned their backs. Even from ghosts in suits and folded arms. Later that night, Elijah walked to Black Otter Creek once more. He stood at the place it all began. The rocks were covered in snow now. The water moved beneath the ice, quiet but sure. He closed his eyes. And in his mind, he saw it all again, the splash, the struggle, the fear in Jeremy's eyes, and the choice that rewrote the town's future. But then he saw something else. Mason. Younger. Angry. Confused. Drowning in a different way. And Elijah realized something. He didn't just save Jeremy. He tried to save Mason, too. Even if Mason didn't want saving. Even if the world didn't see it that way. Elijah turned to go home. But just before he left, he looked back one more time and whispered into the air. Water never lies. It shows us who we are. But it can also wash us clean. And with that, he walked away from the river, knowing that while the past may ripple through time, it doesn't have to define the future. Not if someone's willing to dive in and pull the truth to the surface. The night was heavy with thunder. It hadn't rained in weeks, but that night the sky cracked open as if it, too, had grown tired of holding back. Elijah sat by the window with the lights off, watching the storm through the glass he'd replaced just 2 days before. Something in his bones told him the real storm hadn't started yet. At exactly 10:17 p.m., his phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. Come to the creek. Now. Mason's there. He's going to do something stupid. He hesitated only a moment. Then grabbed his coat. Black Otter Creek was swollen from the rain, its muddy waters swirling faster than usual. Lightning flashed above, illuminating the trees in jagged white. And there, standing at the edge of the rocks, was Mason Blake. Soaked to the bone. Holding a bottle of whiskey. And shouting at no one. "You think I care?" Mason screamed into the storm. "You think any of this matters? My dad'll fix it like he always does. You all think he can't fix this?" Elijah stepped into the clearing quietly, not saying a word. But Mason saw him. "Of course," he spat. "The town hero. Mr. Black Messiah." Elijah didn't flinch. "Put the bottle down. You ruined everything," Mason shouted. "Jeremy was weak. You should have let him drown. And now everyone's looking at me like I'm the freak?" Elijah's voice was low but firm. "No, son. They're looking at you like someone who finally got seen for what he is." Mason threw the bottle into the creek. It shattered on the rocks. He turned toward Elijah, face twisted. "You don't get it. People like you don't belong in East Hollow. You're only useful when you're quiet. When you stay in the shop. When you stay invisible." Lightning cracked overhead again. Elijah took a slow step forward. "I was invisible. Until I jumped in that water. Funny how truth shines through when folks are drowning." Mason's fists clenched. He looked ready to charge, but he didn't. Instead, he broke. Dropped to his knees. Screamed. Pounded the wet dirt with his fists like a child lost in rage and confusion. The sheriff arrived minutes later, thanks to a second tip-off from the same unknown number. Mason was arrested without incident. He was charged with aggravated assault, obstruction, and making threats. Councilman Blake tried to bury it, of course. But the video came next. Someone had filmed Mason's breakdown at the creek. No one knew who. It showed everything. His words. His rage. His confession. And this time, there was no spinning it. No backroom deal could bury what the whole town had now seen. Within 48 hours, Councilman Blake resigned. For personal reasons. Mason was transferred to a juvenile facility. And Elijah? He didn't say a word to the press. He just kept showing up at the auto shop. Changing oil. Fixing transmissions. Living quiet, like always. But East Hollow had changed. Something had shifted. Strangers waved to him now. Kids nodded respectfully when they passed. Marie Whitlock came by for one last interview. But Elijah declined. "The story's done," he said simply. But she disagreed. "Actually," she said, "this town's story is just beginning." One afternoon, about a week later, Elijah sat again by the creek. This time, with Jeremy. They were fishing. Not saying much. The way men talk when they don't need to. "Do you think they'll forget?" Jeremy asked suddenly. Elijah reeled in his line. Thought for a moment. "The river doesn't forget," he said finally. "It carries what we throw into it. Every truth. Every lie. Everything we try to bury." Jeremy nodded quietly. Elijah continued. "But it also washes things clean. If we let it." Lightning didn't flash that day. The sky was clear. The water was calm. But beneath its surface? The current had changed. So had East Hollow. And Elijah Carter? He didn't just save a boy. He saved a town from pretending,